Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here with your Hollywoke hot take. Politics is killing comedy, in my view. When Jon Stewart was doing The Daily Show, it was fun. And Jon was that perfect blend of he's a little knowledgeable, but ultimately a goof. He was a goofy guy talking about the news. He didn't pretend to have he did once in a while, but he didn't often pretend to be serious. Now, everybody's pretending to be serious. Everybody's in this game, and it's killing comedy. Hollywood jumps in to support Democrats in Georgia's Senate races. I mean, this is ridiculous. Hollywood is on the other side of the country, and they're jumping in on these races now. They couldn't be more transparent about where their partisan loyalties lie, and that's it. They are part of the Democratic machine. If you think otherwise, you are just blind. Hollywood is the Democratic Party. The media is the Democratic Party. Why would they have this in The Hollywood Reporter at all? The Hollywood Reporter is supposed to be about movies, supposed to be about celebrities. What part of this is about celebrities? It's about celebrities running down to Georgia because they think they're important enough to influence elections. They're supposed to be actors. They're supposed to be entertainers. They want power, apparently, because I think a lot of them are just caught up in this nonsense. But getting back to comedy, here's that Vanity Fair article with all the late night talk show hosts. And these guys, in my view, and this is just my view, most of them, their comedy has been destroyed by this. Now, Bill Maher, my old boss, who I'm totally biased for, because the guy, hey, he paid me. But I will say that Maher's an exception in this group because his profile actually went up because he went from, being a stand-up guy who wasn't particularly political. He'd been in a few movies, but they were awful, in my view. But when he did Politically Incorrect, at a time, and this was, and it started back in the 90s. That was in the 90s. Political stuff, that was still when The Daily Show was newish, and doing this kind of political stuff was newer. So, yeah, he does get a pass because he was doing it when it wasn't particularly in vogue. He was an innovator in the format. Larry Wilmore, who's standing to his left, he was just another guy on The Daily Show who got a show. And it didn't work out for him. Didn't catch on. Jimmy Fallon, who in my view wasn't particularly funny on SNL, just fell into The Tonight Show because, I don't know, I guess because he's young. He's not too bad. He's still kind of goofy. But they often criticize Fallon for being relentlessly positive about any guest and whatever they're promoting. Which you could say, yeah, that's part of his job, but he doesn't come off as very genuine, And yeah, I'm going to compare everybody to Carson. At least Carson, he was usually fairly positive about anything, but he was also, he didn't act like he was also a supporter. You know what I mean? Like, there's a way you can say, oh, you're coming on, I think it's a terrible movie, and like, oh, so this is your movie. Oh, you got to show a clip? Like, see, I'm not saying that it's the greatest thing ever. I'm just saying you're showing the clip. And that's kind of the way Carson was. He wasn't negative. He wouldn't say anything negative, but I don't think he would usually said anything, super positive if he wasn't behind anything. Whereas I think Jimmy just is relentlessly positive about almost everything that's on his show. But that's just my take. I do think he's kind of got his humor still, but, and again, I hate slamming the guy, but I never thought he was funny to begin with. Like, his sense of humor was always kind of like barely there, Now, John Oliver, was another guy from The Daily Show, right? He was another correspondent. And he was pretty funny on The Daily Show. But, I think he's even contradicted himself on this Dominion voting system. Back in 2019, he did a piece on Dominion voting systems, and he made a bunch of snarky comments. He even said Donald Trump was right in the segment. And now, of course, not only is he taking the opposite track and just relentlessly, going after Trump night after night, his own show released a Twitter thread trying to explain why it seems that their old segment on Dominion voting really isn't being interpreted correctly. So it's not so much even these guys. It's a lot of the behind the scenes guys, the producers and directors and whatnot. They really pull the strings. But in terms of his comedy, it's killing his comedy. I don't think of his show as like, ooh, that's a comedy show. It's a political show that's sometimes funny. And who's not in this group is Samantha Bee. I don't think she had her show yet, but like her show's relentlessly partisan. Like her show just seems another Daily Show host just seems a show dedicated to the Karens of the world. Seth Meyers, another SNL alum, kind of just like, in my view, again, this is all my opinion, who's sort of always the B team guy. We'll give him a show, but we're not going to give him the show. We'll give him the show for, that hardly anybody watches it, because he'll do okay. And he's sort of like a harmless guy. But even his comedy, I've seen some of his segments, and they're just so dreary and like, I'm a real reporter kind of thing, as opposed to being funny. And what a lot of these guys fail to understand is, if you don't understand the politics, if you don't understand the nuance, then the jokes fall flat. The jokes fall pretty flat. And then you have to go back and rely on your comedy. And a lot of these guys they're too old. They're too old. Comedy is a young man's game. It's a young man's game. And part of that reason is as you get older, you get more cynical. You see things and you're out of the loop for pop culture, and you're struggling to stay relevant so you can make hipper references. Now, some guys have a different style where that hipness isn't really a factor. Like if you look at a guy like Dennis Miller, right? Dennis Miller makes, references, really highbrow references to like, Greek philosophers and stuff. Those kinds of references are classic, right? I mean, they're classic. Like, they've been around for thousands of years. So if you make a reference like that, you either know it or you don't. You kind of got to be smart enough, but, I'm trying to think of the one he made. I want to say Demosthenes? Is that it? I don't know. He'd make some flip comment and just throw out, God, I can't think of the name. I can't think of how to pronounce it in my head while I'm talking. Anyhow, Dennis Miller is one of those guys. And, but, even he, I think, was harmed by his political slant, because he, for a while he was having shows, and he would have been in this mix too, but he was a conservative in the days that, during the Bush era, and kind of wasn't popular, and the media was sort of against him. And I think his support for Bush hurt him, and I think it should have, because Bush wasn't a good president. He was the worst. Trevor Noah, to me, is a guy who's been ruined. His comedy has just been ruined by his success. The Daily Show was the absolute wrong show for Trevor Noah. In my view, I've seen his stand-up, and it's good. Solid stuff. He would have been great on a sitcom, I think, or something like that, something more traditionally comedic. And it feels like now everybody's been hammered into the Daily Show sort of format. There's not even, I mean, this is an old article, right? This isn't even all the guys from The Daily Show. And of course, you got Colbert, who I've talked about a lot, who is another guy who's just let his TDS ruin his comedy. And he's been so funny in the past. But it's like, you know, you look at a guy like Woody Allen, right? He was making funny movies, and then suddenly he made serious movies. Suddenly he made that transition. I think in every comedian, there's a serious guy sort of begging to get out, and eventually they do when you get older. You know, you look at Steve Martin. Steve Martin used to do the funniest, goofiest stuff on stage, and now he's kind of serious. And when he went back, when he got serious for a little while, or tried to make that transition, it seemed, and then they remade the Inspector Clouseau movies with him in the lead, which, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, you would have thought, oh man, that'll be funny. And it probably would have been back in the 70s and 80s. But when he did it, it was kind of like, you know, this is sort of sad. And I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's great. But, you know, age really hurts comedians, I think. And the political stuff, the serious stuff, because politics is so serious when you get right down to it, people treat it seriously, it just kills their comedy. Jimmy Kimmel, another guy. You know, he's gone from being on the Man Show, drinking beers and watching girls jump up and down on trampolines, to crying on his show. I mean, actually crying like a sad clown. And it's just unbelievable that he's made that transformation, you know, from a guy who was fun, little un-PC, but not, you know, particularly, to now probably the most PC guy in this mix. Conan O'Brien's kind of kept it right there. He's kind of held the line. If anybody was going to be the heir to Carson after Letterman should have been the heir. Although he's gotten super serious too with his wacky beard and new show. It definitely would have been Conan O'Brien. Yeah. Conan O'Brien, you know, he has that, in my view, he's so smart, and he has a right mix of still trying to do comedy. Like, comedy is a priority for him. Yeah, he'll do some political stuff too. He's smart enough to do it. But he's also smart enough to wrap it in, you know, a piece of cheese, and the cheese is comedy. And he's willing to take risk. I think a lot of these guys, and James Corbett, I think that's his name, James Corbett. I don't even know that guy. I think a lot of these other guys have just been caught up in politics for not just the last 4 years, probably the last 8 years, really. And, you know, it's just ruined comedy. It's ruined it. Part of it's the cancel culture too, and Twitter, but I think a lot of it is the politics. Out of all the guys up here, I would say, you know, you got Bill Maher. He should be doing politics because that's his whole shtick. That's absolutely his whole shtick. I think Conan doesn't really do politics, and I think all the others should have abandoned politics a long time ago. Should be apolitical. Maybe not Trevor Noah. I just don't think Trevor Noah is right for The Daily Show. And who am I leaving out? Ugh, there's been so many. And now you have, you know, that what's her name? Singh, I think her last name is, who does some sort of wacky late night talk show, but then does intersectional feminism with it. I mean, it's just nuts to me. You know, she had a following online, I know, and seemed to do funny skits. But these guys all seem to abandon the funny for serious because I guess they want to be seen as important people. But as a comedian, you kind of can't be seen as that important, because once you're seen as important, it kind of kills your comedy. You got to be seen as a clown. And I think it's better to go down as a clown than to go down as one of these suits. I think it's better to, you know, burn out than fade away. And I'd rather burn out as a comedian than one of these very serious celebrities with a TV show.